Hey everyone, welcome to Vanished X. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 creepy basement stories from Ohio's quiet suburbs. Tales of hidden rooms, strange voices, and chilling secrets that were never meant to be found. Now this is still a brand new channel, and your support means everything. Many people watch but forget to subscribe, and then they miss the next upload. By subscribing, you'll not only catch every story, but you'll also help share these eerie tales with more people who love the dark and mysterious. So grab a seat, turn down the lights, and let's head downstairs together. I used to think Maple Strand was the kind of street where nothing truly bad could happen. Ranch houses, clipped lawns, cars that looked perpetually clean because people washed them at dusk when the heat gave up and the mosquitoes came out. We had block cookouts, group texts about porch pirates that never materialized, and a Facebook page named after the cul-de-sac fountain that hadn't worked since I was in 5th grade. Parents called it a quiet pocket of Dayton, like quiet was something they had negotiated and signed for. The quiet was its own sound at night, the soft, steady hum of air conditioners, the occasional closing of a car door like a sealed envelope. The party was at the Dawsons, mostly neighbors, a few of us older kids taking over the garage with the foosball table and a cooler that said Lake Water Marker, with most of the letters scratched off. I was there because my mom asked me to keep an eye on my little sister, who vanished instantly into a pack of kids chalking hopscotch so complicated it looked like a map for a treasure you'd never find. Inside the house it smelled like detergent and potato salad and something floral, like someone had sprayed the couch with a thought. I remember thinking the music was just loud enough to blur the edges of conversation without hiding the shape. Adults were telling the same stories they always tell, just with new names and new sales at the hardware store attached. And there was Taylor, leaning against the open garage door, giving me the kind of look you give your friend when you want them to do something you can tell the difference between bragging and confession about later. "What?" I asked, and wiped condensation off the plastic table with my sleeve so the cups wouldn't skate. He jerked his chin toward the Dawsons' side fence. "Hollenbeck's got the weirdest basement in the block. Everyone just called him that, Hollenbeck. The man who kept his hedges low and his flag out, who shoveled other people's sidewalks when it snowed, who always said evenin'. He had lived on Maple Strand longer than my family by decades and lived alone. His house had pale siding like a peeled almond and 2 small basement windows that collected spiders. I had noticed that his kitchen light went on at odd hours, glowing through a thin floral curtain like the sun pretending to rise for one person only. His mailbox lid shut softly as if it were trained. He was the kind of neighbor people mention in online groups with an attached, "but he's harmless," and everyone replies with thumbs up. Someone tried to deliver a package to him, Taylor said. Nobody answered. They looked through the little window and saw, like a wall of paper, full of missing kids. Remember the posters that used to be hung up outside Thrifty Pantry? That, but everywhere. Could be a hobby, I said, smiling, and then didn't. Because who uses their basement walls for that? He wasn't home? Taylor shrugged. If he was, he didn't answer.
"You know he's here."
I saw him with a red Solo cup in the yard by the hydrangeas. We both looked across the Dawsons' lawn. Hollenbeck stood near the side gate with 2 other adults nodding at something. He had the posture of a person who had learned not to take up space and a shirt that didn't fit the way shirts usually do. The collar was either too wide or his neck didn't want it. It occurred to me that if his basement had a whole wall of clippings and flyers about missing kids, maybe it was because he cared too much, or maybe it meant the exact opposite of caring. The thought slid across me like a cold spoon and left a white stripe. "Dare you," Taylor said, "to go look? You want me to go into a person's house while he's at the same party?" Taylor grinned. "You can say you left your hoodie there last week when you brought over the neighborhood petitions. I'll bet his back door's open. Everyone's going in and out for ice." I laughed like I wasn't thinking about it already. The garage foosball table ratcheted and clacked. My sister's chalk map had grown into a country bordered by a river of melted popsicles. A paper plate bumped against my ankle. The party was loud enough to make you feel invisible. "If I get caught," I said, "you're telling my mom you dared me." Deal. The path between the Dawsons and Hollenbecks was worn into the grass from years of short-cutting trash cans on Tuesday nights. I took it like a person walking somewhere they had every right to go. The chain-link gate to his yard had a latch you had to lift with a finger and thumb, like picking up a beetle by its shell. The grass in his yard was shorter than everyone else's, and had a faint smell of iron, as if he used a different kind of water. A folding chair leaned against the basement bulkhead, and the shadow it made looked like a person sitting there with very straight posture, paying attention. I told myself I was going to knock on the kitchen door, and I would have, except the mouth of the bulkhead stair yawned a little. Breathing cool air that smelled like clay and dryer sheets, there was a pulling to it. The way basements pull when you're 12 and want to prove you aren't scared of unfinished rooms. I looked back. Through the space between our yards, I could see Mr. Dawson laughing, his hand on his heart. I could see Hollenbeck's profile, the red cup near his chin, his smile small and tidy. I put my foot on the first concrete step and dipped inside the smell of paper. There are two kinds of basement light. One is yellow and forgiving and makes everything look like a stored holiday. The other is a hard pearly fluorescent that hums like bees working inside drywall. Hollenbeck's was the second kind. I put my foot on the first step and the bulb stirred to life on a motion sensor. The hum rose, a long unbroken note, and settled somewhere above my teeth. I went down, holding onto the handrail that was colder than it should have been in June. The wall Taylor had mentioned was there. Not just a wall, but all the walls. Newspaper clippings, photocopies of flyers, a few printouts with color so thin you could see streaks where the ink had stuttered. Names in different fonts, ages, the words "last seen" repeating like a quiet cough. There were photos of kids in school picture backgrounds, kids with braces, kids squinting into the sun near bikes. There were a few that didn't look like kids at all until you read the ages. 20, 21, and then something folded in your chest. There were dates that were older than me and some only a few years ago, edged with rain warp. Underneath the clippings, along a waist-high shelf, were Polaroids. They bent under their own weight in a shallow bend of time. In each, a face glowed a little too white from the flash. The people weren't always centered. Some were half-turned, some blinking, some talking. As if the photographer had raised the camera in the middle of a sentence and clicked without asking. A boy in a baseball cap whose brim cut his eyes into shadow. A girl with a pizza box balanced on her forearms like an offering. Two brothers whose shoulders were touching, but their eyes didn't agree. I felt a jump in my throat like a misstep on stairs. I wasn't breathing right and made myself try. The room smelled like paper, a clean, tired smell, and beneath it something sweet that might have been dryer sheets or the last breath of a candle. There were other things down there. Canvas drop cloths folded into rectangles, a dehumidifier with a blinking green light, an orange extension cord coiled neatly on a hook, as if Hollenbeck had built a museum of ordinary maintenance around a different exhibition entirely. A desktop fan sat on a stool aimed at nothing. Beside it, a stack of mail rubber-banded. One of the clippings had a corner that kept lifting and sticking back down like a tongue. "You shouldn't be here." The voice didn't come from the stairs or from behind me. It arrived like the hum had split and grown a mouth. I turned and saw in the glass of a framed clipping my own reflection with the basement light turning my face flat. I breathed out and called up, "Hello?" in a voice pitched to sound like I was not doing anything wrong. There was no answer, only a soft movement at the edges of the room, the way air moves when a vent opens far away. I felt heat creep up my neck, the guilty kind. I made myself pick up one of the Polaroids. It had a fingerprint in the white margin. Not a dirty print, but the glossy kind that's only a difference in shine. The person in the photo was a girl with dark hair and a grocery store uniform shirt, the kind they make you tuck in. She looked like she'd just realized she had forgotten to turn off a burner. I put it down as if it could break. I would have left without touching anything else if not for the last wall. It looked like the others until I saw the empty space at its center. A rectangle of paint without tape residue, without the faint squares left by old newsprint. A clean patch like a mouth waiting. On the shelf beneath it, a Polaroid sat alone. It was face down. I knew the exact feeling of the choice I made when I flipped it. That storybook hinge in your chest that tells you time is about to develop in your hands, it was me. The flash had blown my eyes so wide my pupils were needles. I was looking sideways like someone calling my name had made me turn at the last second. Behind me was a sliver of something I recognized. The Dawson's hydrangeas, their flowers bleached into a color the name tag at the nursery would have called snow. I had that party shirt on, the one with the tiny triangles that made your eyes tired if you stared. The date scrawled in pen on the bottom was today's. There was a second notch of pen on the edge like someone had started to write something and stopped. My hand shook without an audience. When stairs creak in a movie, they announce a person. When stairs creak in a real house, they talk about wood and what it carries. The basement steps spoke once. I froze, the Polaroid balanced lightly on my fingers like something alive that could run. I put it down and stepped away and then couldn't remember if I had put it in exactly the same place. It felt like the kind of thing that would make a person angry if they came back and found it even 1 inch wrong. The hum of the light had thinned into a tone that lives under your skin. I climbed the stairs, counting my breaths like steps. 14. 15. At the landing, I paused, my hand on the metal that had cooled my palm, and told myself I was going to say I'd been looking for ice. People accept certain lies because they've rehearsed hearing them their whole lives. I pictured the shape my face would make when I told it. I practiced the small laugh. At the top of the stairs, I paused. It seemed impossible that the party was still going, that music was still popping like a far-off parade, that someone was still telling a story they'd told before. I listened for a footstep on tile. I heard only the air conditioner turning over in the ducts like a slow river. I came up the stairs and eased the bulkhead door until it kissed the frame without closing. The yard was pretended empty. The folding chair leaned like it had since the Pleistocene. The sky was the color of a television tuned to an unambitious channel. Between the two houses, I saw him. Hollenbeck stood with his back to me, looking over the low fence at the Dawsons' shed, the red cup dangling from his hand. He wasn't looking at anything, not really. People do that at parties when they need to put their face somewhere while their brain cools down. I told myself all of this while my skin prickled as if the air had turned to carbonated water. He turned then, slow and polite, and his eyes went to my hands like he was inventorying whether I was carrying anything that wasn't mine. "Yeah," I said, and my voice came out like I had been running. "I was looking for the bathroom and got turned around." "In my yard?" He made it sound like a joke he didn't mind committing to. "The bathroom's in there," he said, nodding at the Dawsons' back door. And I laughed because that's what the script required. And then we both stood in the brittle quiet that falls when two people share a lie and decide to keep it. Back at the party, the garage was louder. Taylor mouthed, "Well?" at me, and I shook my head once too hard. I smiled and lied. The night obedient kept humming. I didn't grow up believing in haunted houses. Drafts have reasons and pipes talk when metal cools. That's what I told May when we signed the papers on the narrow brick bungalow on Larkspur Road, the one with a sagging porch and a yard that smelled like wet leaves. The inspector called the place honest, which I took to mean old but not malicious, and for a month it behaved like an old dog that only needed steady feeding and a dry corner. We painted over nicotine ceilings, pulled up shag carpet the color of weak tea, and found pennies and hairpins under the baseboards. It felt like proof of other lives and not a warning. We slept on a mattress in the living room around space heaters and joked that the house wanted to know us first. The basement made the first demand. It was half fieldstone, half poured wall, the kind of Midwestern basement that keeps its own weather, cool and damp and content to smell like old laundry. Someone had painted the concrete floor bruised gray. The furnace, a rectangular beast with a tin belly and rust freckles, sat in the back under a tangle of ductwork that hummed when it breathed. A pegboard held a few tools left by the last owner. A bent stud finder, a hammer sticky with tape residue, a handsaw with teeth like a bad smile. None of that bothered me. What did was the wall of plywood panels screwed down along the far corner like a crude patch job, with foam stuffed along the seams. It looked too neat for panic, too deliberate for a quick fix. May found the screws. She has the patience for delicate things, for puzzles and quilting and the careful twist that keeps threads from knotting. She set a tarp, wrapped her hair, and backed out each screw like she was diffusing something. "If it's mice," she said, "we'll buy the humane traps. If it was mold, we would bleach it. If it was an old coal chute, we would seal it." We gave names to every unknown, then took them away with explanations. The last panel stuck as if the wood had grown into the wall, and when it cracked free, the basement air pulled in on itself. It felt like opening a cooler and finding its cold still folded inside. It was a room, and not a big one. The builder had used cinder block and then skimmed it with plaster that had cracked into thin river maps. No light, just our headlamps and the cone of the trouble light slung from a rafter. The floor had been painted the same gray, but dust had made everything a shade duller, as if someone had sifted flour over grief. On the wall opposite the opening, A heat duct ended in a round grill with concentric rings, so clean it looked recent. In front of it, lined along the baseboard, stood children's shoes. 7 pairs. Scuffed leather and cracked vinyl, 2 with frayed laces tied into serious bows, 1 with a buckled strap where the tongue had been worried soft by a nervous thumb. They were small in the way that makes you lower your voice without meaning to. May didn't speak. I didn't either. We didn't touch them. Not at first. We backed out and stood together under the single bulb by the stairs, listening to the furnace whisper in its belly. I said the obvious thing, that they were probably a storage oddity, the way people keep a drawer of keys that fit no locks. May nodded. She rubbed her arms through her sweatshirt, like she'd just walked out of a freezer aisle. "It's colder in there," she said. "Colder than the rest of the basement, feel it?" I did, and I didn't want to. Cold is supposed to move with air. The cold in that room just waited. That night we brought the garden table down and set it just inside the opening like a guard. May arranged the shoes on a sheet of craft paper and numbered them with a pencil. If we were going to explain this, we would organize it. I took pictures with my phone, angled so the flash wouldn't bleach the leather. The pictures made the shoes look more alone than they did in person. We kept the furnace set low, on principle and on thrift, and it kicked on while we were measuring the distance between the grill and the first pair. The room made a sound like a breath held under a blanket. It wasn't a whistle. It was thinner, like a voice pushed through teeth. May stepped back fast enough to bump the table. One of the shoes tipped and rolled its toe toward the vent. We slept upstairs with the house growling in its ducts. At some hour that was neither late nor early, the furnace started again and I woke, to the sound of crying. That smaller kind kids do when they've held it in too long and know they'll be scolded. It came up through the floorboards like the plumbing had learned language. May woke too and gripped my wrist the way she used to when thunder unsettled her. "You hear it," she said. I did. I heard the wet, hiccuping end of it, the part where a chest shudders and then swallows. It bled into the clank of the ducts and then was gone. The next morning held coffee and bravado. I told myself we'd heard the wind and the echo of heat expanding metal. I told myself the shoes were props from a family that ran a yard sale in the rain. I told myself every story that made the world ordinary because ordinary is manageable. May, who has never loved lies even as comfort, printed off old house listings at the library and came home with a box of records from the county. We sat on the floor with highlighters and found that in 1972, a partition permit had been filed for utility access, then closed without inspection. The owner then, a widow named Inez Pritchard, had no children listed in the file. The neighborhood newsletter from that decade mentioned a babysitting co-op and warned about children playing near the creek. None of it made a picture, just edges. I went back down alone in the evening with a dust mask and gloves. The shoes weighed almost nothing. When I lifted the first pair, the sole left a clean outline on the gray, like the place under a magnet. Inside were curled paper tissues, long dried, and a flattened hair ribbon. The leather had that sweet rot smell old books keep. Each pair was a small insistence that someone had stood inside them, had hopped or paced or learned to tie and retie. The vent ticked softly as hot air thinned into the room. I thought of May, upstairs making soup that smelled like bay leaves, and I said out loud, "To nobody, we're going to find your home." My voice did not belong in that room, and I felt it come back to me with a second voice braided into it, as if an echo had learned a habit. That night, the crying grew braver. It rode the furnace on and off, like whatever made it had to wait for the machine to give it a throat. It wasn't always sad. Sometimes it sounded angry, and sometimes it sounded tired the way a grown person gets, with the drag of someone who has given too many explanations. May started keeping the door to the basement shut and wedging a rolled bath towel at the threshold like we were keeping smoke out. We spoke about it the way people speak about money they don't have, carefully as if a wrong word would invite a collector. May's friend Dara came by with a cake and her own opinions. She helps run the thrift store over on North Line and knows the history of everything that arrives. She stood in the doorway of the little room and hugged herself, and the candle flame behind her guttered like the air had changed its mind. "Those are 50s and 60s, she said, pointing with her chin. That buckle? That's later. These ones here are older, maybe hand-me-downs saved for Sunday. She was about to step in when the furnace knocked. The sound that followed wasn't crying. It was that hiccuping swallow again, multiplied, like the room had practiced it and wanted us to hear how well it could do the trick. Dara left the cake and didn't stay for coffee. The winter set in hard. The creek glazed over. The porch posts creaked at night like shoulders settling after work. Our grocery receipt grew longer with things that made heat: lentils, broth, fire starters, wool socks from the discount bin. We joked less. May started talking to the shoes when she sorted laundry at the table. She would say things like, "We're not unkind people," and "We're going to make the house better." I started taping the duct seams with mastic like frosting, telling myself that if the vent was sealed, the sound would have to make other choices. It didn't. Instead, the crying learned routes through the rest of the house. It came up in the main hallway, thin as radio static, and then found the vent in the pantry where we keep onions. The onions sprouted in the dark with long green threads like shoots in a jar of science class water. We invited the neighbor from across the street, a man named Vic who lives alone and keeps a snowblower like a trophy, to look at the furnace. He's the kind who listens more than he speaks, and then leans in to look close. He tapped the heat exchanger and frowned. "You sure this room was sealed before?" he asked when I showed him the partition line. I told him yes, and he let the flashlight consider the floor. He didn't look at the shoes. "Someone wanted the air to pass through there," he said finally. "You know how you can warm a car without starting it if you run a long duct from a neighbor's dryer vent?" I didn't. He shook his head like he'd said too much. Air goes where it's invited, even when it shouldn't. May started dreaming out loud. Her breathing would change, that light, quick rasp I recognized from when she has a cold, and she would say sentences into the pillow. Sit on the mat. No spilling. Quiet feet. When I woke her and told her, she would rub her face and say, "I smell oatmeal." The basement started to smell like oatmeal on mornings when the furnace ran longer, a soft, gluey sweet that didn't belong to anything in our pantry. I found myself standing at the edge of the furnace room, one hand on the door frame, feeling the cold lift and settle like something sleeping under blankets and turning over. The crying changed again. The sound started and stopped with no rhythm, so that the only pattern was the interruption of quiet. I brought down the carbon monoxide detector and set it on the table in case we were inventing tragedy out of headaches. It stayed mute. We bought a cheap digital recorder and left it on overnight with the red light winking like an irritated eye. In the morning, we played back the file while we ate cereal. Noise, noise, the cough of the furnace noise, and then a voice not old and not young, pressed flat by the microphone and the concrete around it, saying very softly, "Line up." It is astonishing how quickly the ordinary world thins when you hear a word where there should only be wind. We stopped going into the little room after that. Not because of the voice, but because both of us wanted to. And sometimes wanting is the first mistake. We decided we would sell the shoes together at the thrift store, with a printed story about how they were found, so the world of them would be shared out like slices of a cake. We meant it. We even boxed them and set the box by the stairs labeled in black marker, "Shoes, basement, 7 pairs." That night, while we were upstairs reading, the furnace turned on and ran too long. The crying had learned to push over the top of the fan, and for the first time the sound made words that were not just words but speech. No shoes. No shoes. No shoes. The box downstairs rubbed on the concrete like an animal turning in straw. I went down with the bat we keep behind the bedroom door and found the box dragged halfway back to the opening, one flap torn, one strap shoe on the floor, pointing back like a dog with its nose toward home. May cried in the kitchen, furious at me for being scared in front of her, then furious at the house for making us into the kind of people who cried in kitchens. We put the shoes back in their place, not lined up so much as gathered like children who have been called from different corners. We left the recorder running again. The house settled. The furnace rattle. At night the motor hums, the vent whispers, and 7 small pairs wait, toes aimed at the grill, as if the next breath will finally call them by name. The house on Maplewood Drive was nothing remarkable, just another squat brick ranch sitting among dozens like it on the east side of Akron. Jason and Emily had moved in with their daughter, Abby, because it was affordable and close to Emily's job at the hospital. The place smelled faintly of mildew when they first toured it, but Jason chalked that up to an old basement and Ohio humidity. They signed the lease anyway, figuring a dehumidifier would take care of it. At first, the nights were uneventful. Then a few weeks in, Emily shook Jason awake one morning and asked if he'd heard it. 3 sharp knocks coming from below, sometime after 3 a.m. He hadn't. He shrugged it off, saying it was probably the pipes expanding. But the next night, Jason heard it too. A single knock, dull and deliberate, like knuckles against wood. The sound came from beneath the concrete floor of the basement. It happened again the following night. Always once, always at 3. Jason tried rationalizing it. Old plumbing, settling foundation, maybe even a raccoon under the crawl space, but there was no crawl space. The basement slab was supposed to be solid. He went down there once, barefoot in the dark, holding a flashlight that threw jittery beams across the cement walls. When the knock came, it was so close beneath his feet that he felt the vibration in his toes. He bolted upstairs, heart pounding. Emily started leaving the basement light on, though it did nothing to ease the feeling that the floor itself was waiting. Abby, only 6, began waking from nightmares, saying she heard someone tapping from the downstairs room. Jason and Emily never mentioned the knocking to her, but kids don't need explanations to sense dread. One Saturday, Jason had finally had enough. He borrowed a sledgehammer from a neighbor, telling Emily he was going to break open the concrete and see what was underneath. She begged him not to, saying it could just be bad plumbing or tree roots, but his stubbornness wouldn't let go. He waited until after midnight, when the house was quiet, then went down, alone. The first few swings rang out metallic, the slab refusing to give. Sweat poured down his back. By the time 3 o'clock crept near, he had carved out a jagged hole big enough to see damp soil beneath. He stood there panting, staring into the earth. That's when the knock came again, but this time, it wasn't muffled. It was right there, against the thin layer of dirt echoing through the open cavity. Jason's hands shook as he scraped the soil back with a shovel. Only a few inches down, the metal edge struck something hard, something that wasn't stone. He brushed it clear with his fingers until the pale curve of a skull looked up at him through the dirt. Small, child-sized. Emily's scream cut through the basement before he even realized she had come down. She pulled Abby close, shielding her eyes from the hole. Jason couldn't speak. More shapes began to emerge as he pulled the soil away. Long bones piled and twisted like they had been packed in tight. The smell that rose up was sour and unmistakably wrong. The police came, and then the silence fell heavier than ever. No one explained how the remains had gotten there. The landlord claimed ignorance, said he had bought the place cheap at auction years back. The investigation dragged on. Names of missing children whispered, but never confirmed. Jason and Emily moved out within weeks, but they swore that on their last night in the house, as they carried boxes up the basement stairs, the knock came again, soft, patient, waiting for someone to answer. And though they left Akron behind, Emily sometimes wakes Jason at 3 a.m., shaking him, asking if he hears it. And in the dark, in that thin silence between heartbeats, he swears he does. When Alex moved into the duplex on South Taylor Road in Cleveland Heights, the basement light was already odd. A single bare bulb dangled above the washer and dryer, its glow faintly tinted red like a dying ember. He figured the landlord had just used some cheap knockoff bulb. The next day, he bought a pack of bright white LEDs and swapped it out. That night, he came back down with a laundry basket and stopped cold. The bulb burned red again, casting the cinder block walls in a feverish glow. He didn't tell anyone at first, because how do you explain that? He checked the socket, even called an electrician friend who shrugged and said wiring in those old duplexes was always quirky. Still, Alex couldn't shake the heaviness of the air when he was down there. It felt like standing too close to a furnace vent, hot and thick, though the basement was always cold. Shadows stretched in ways they shouldn't, long and thin across the floor even when he stood directly under the bulb. By the second week, he had replaced it 3 more times, each time waking to find the bulb crimson by morning. His upstairs neighbor, Denise, caught him muttering at the socket one afternoon. She was in her 50s, a quiet woman who worked nights at a bakery. When he mentioned the bulb, her face changed. "Don't go down there after dark," she said flatly, then walked back upstairs without another word. That night he dreamed of the basement. He dreamed he was folding clothes when the shadows along the wall began to ripple, like something pressing against fabric. A whisper rose out of the thick air, not words exactly, just the suggestion of being addressed. He woke drenched in sweat, the sound of his dryer buzzer echoing in his ears though it hadn't been running. Denise started avoiding him after that. He asked her once in the hallway if she'd ever had trouble with the basement light. She didn't answer, only shut her door with a force that rattled the frame. From then on, he noticed she left her laundry to pile up rather than go down there. The responsibility was his alone. He tried one last time to break the cycle. At a hardware store on Lee Road, he bought a pack of high-end daylight bulbs, the kind that mimicked the sun. He screwed one in, watched it flare bright white. For the first time, he felt relief. But the following morning, not only was the bulb red again, it was dimmer than ever, glowing like a coal about to go out. When he reached to unscrew it, the glass felt warm, almost pulsing under his fingers as though it had a heartbeat. That night he heard noises from below, slow, dragging steps as if someone were pacing the concrete floor. He knocked on Denise's door, desperate for confirmation, but she didn't answer. The pacing stopped the moment he opened the basement door. Only the red glow remained, painting the staircase in a sick haze. He told himself he'd move out by the end of the month. But as he lay in bed, unable to sleep, the basement light flickered through the crack under his door. Not the red glow this time, something darker, a shifting shadow, stretching farther than the walls should allow. When he finally stood, drawn against his better judgment, the bulb was no longer red. It was black, yet somehow still shining, pouring its darkness across the floor, and in that unnatural light, the shadows no longer belonged to him. When I moved into the house on Geneva Street, the realtor warned me that the basement was old-fashioned. That was her polite way of saying it was dark, damp, and smelled faintly of rust and mildew. Down there, wedged against the far wall, was a chest freezer as heavy as a coffin. Its lid was secured by a rusted padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s. I asked about it, but she shrugged. The former owner, a widow who had passed quietly in her sleep, had left it behind. I figured it would make a good beer cooler once I got it open. It bothered me, though, the way it just sat there humming faintly even though it wasn't plugged in. I checked the outlet. The cord wasn't even connected, yet every time I went downstairs I swore I heard the faint buzz of machinery. After 2 weeks, I couldn't take the curiosity anymore. I bought a pair of bolt cutters and snapped the lock clean off. The lid groaned like a stiff jaw as I pried it open. Inside, nothing. Just frost lining the walls like a thin coat of snow. Relief swept through me. I laughed at myself, embarrassed that I had been nervous. But that night, when I went down to switch the laundry, I noticed the frost was thicker. It was climbing the sides in crooked streaks, and in certain spots it seemed to bunch up in odd shapes, like melted wax hardened mid-drip. By the third night, the shapes had grown into contours, eyes, noses, mouths, half-formed human faces frozen into the ice. They weren't perfect, just soft ridges and shadows, but there was no mistaking the impression of people staring out from inside. Their mouths gaped as though in silent protest. I touched one, and the freezer vibrated beneath my palm, a dull, low hum traveling up into my arm. I started avoiding the basement, but the freezer made itself known even upstairs. At night, the house seemed colder, the radiators working overtime yet leaving the air sharp as winter. Sometimes I would wake up to hear a thudding noise, like someone pounding from beneath the floorboards. I finally called a buddy, Mark, to come check it out. "Maybe it's just busted pipes," he said. He laughed at the freezer until he saw the ice himself. His face dropped. "Man, that's not right." He swore the faces shifted when he looked away. We tried unplugging it again, dragging it from the wall just to be sure. The cord dangled useless. "Then how the hell's it running?" Mark whispered. He wanted to smash it open with a hammer, but something in me recoiled at the thought. It felt like breaking the freezer would let whatever was inside escape, so I told him to leave it. He didn't argue. He left fast, muttering he wouldn't step foot in that basement again. Over the next week, I kept hearing voices, faint, muffled, like someone talking from the other side of a wall. They weren't words I could make out, just tones, almost pleading. One night I woke to find the house dark and breath puffing in white clouds around me. I stumbled downstairs, drawn against my will, and found the freezer lid standing wide open. Inside, the frost had grown so thick it looked like a solid block of ice, and dozens of faces pressed out from it. Men, women, children, all frozen in silent screams. My reflection was caught between them, warped and pale, like I had already joined their ranks. I slammed the lid shut and jammed the broken lock back in place as if that could hold it. I haven't opened it since. The basement stays shut, though sometimes I still hear the hum rising through the floor. The house feels colder by the day. I keep the thermostat maxed, but it doesn't matter. Winter has settled in, and I think it's coming from below me. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the window at night, I swear my face looks different, longer, hollower, like it's being carved in ice. And now, every morning when I go to brush my teeth, the mirror fogs up no matter the temperature. On that fogged glass, clear as breath on a frozen pane, new faces form around mine, watching, waiting, pressing closer every day. Maya always hated sleeping with the vent above her bed. Most kids feared closets or the space beneath the mattress, but for her, it was that square grate in the ceiling. It sat there, dusty slats angled toward her pillow, and when the furnace clicked on, it hissed like someone whispering secrets they didn't want her to catch. Her parents called it the nerves of a smart kid. Alex and Dana worked long shifts, he at the shipping yard, she at the dental office, and by the time they got home, they had little patience for complaints about vents, shadows, or the sound of someone breathing in the basement. The house wasn't new. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with potential. Potential, in reality, meant groaning pipes, thin drywall, and a furnace that sounded like it had been installed before color television. The first time Maya told them about the whisper, Dana brushed her hair back and smiled too wide. Honey, it's just the fan. Air moving through metal sounds funny sometimes. Like a voice. Nothing to be scared of. Maya nodded, but the next night she heard it again. Not just air. A shape in the sound. Someone pushing their mouth right against the metal grate, saying her name, Maya. She froze. The sound was soft, like it didn't want to wake anyone else. She buried her head under the blanket until morning. For weeks, the whispers came and went. Sometimes it was only her name, stretched thin and sighing. Sometimes it was words she couldn't fully make out, like someone speaking through water. She began sleeping with her lamp on, though she told her parents she just wanted to read before bed. Then came the night she thought she heard her father. It was late. She could tell because the house was quiet in that deep, empty way it only was after midnight. The vent creaked and a voice slipped out, low and familiar. Maya, come downstairs. I need you. She sat up, heart thudding, whispering, Dad? Yes, it's me. Come on down. She hesitated. The air smelled like the furnace, dry, metallic, faintly scorched, but layered beneath it was something damp, like old soil. She got out of bed in her socks, padded through the hall, and peered into the living room. Her father was slumped in the recliner, chin on his chest, the blue TV glow flickering across his face. A can of soda sweated on the table beside him. He was out cold. Behind her, from the dark mouth of the basement door, came the hiss of air through the vent, and then, hurry up, sweetheart. She bolted to her room and slammed the door. The next morning, she begged Dana not to make her sleep under the vent anymore. It talks to me. It knows things. It sounds like you and Dad. Dana sighed, tired lines under her eyes. Sweetheart, if you keep this up, you're going to give yourself nightmares. There's nothing in the vent but air. Maya pressed her lips shut. Adults never believed kids until it was too late. Still, Dana's confidence began to slip when she heard it herself. She was folding laundry one evening, the dryer thumping in the basement below when she paused. Clear as if someone had whispered into her ear, she heard it. Maya. Her hand froze on a stack of towels. The voice hadn't come from upstairs. It had risen through the vent in the wall right beside her. She shook her head, forced a laugh, and told herself it was stress. But that night lying in bed, she woke to a sound that turned her blood to ice, her own voice calling from the vent. "Maya, come to me." She shot up, heart hammering. At first, she thought she'd spoken in her sleep. Then she heard the shuffle of small feet in the hallway. She threw off the blanket and rushed out just in time to see Maya's hand reaching for the basement doorknob. "Maya!" Dana yanked her back. "What are you doing?" "You called me," Maya whispered, eyes glassy with sleep. "No," Dana said firmly, though her hands shook. "That wasn't me." After that, they taped the vents shut. Every grate in the house got a layer of duct tape. Alex muttered about wasted time and imagination gone wild, but he went along with it. Still, even sealed, the sound leaked through. Muffled now, like voices pressed against a wall, but still there. Alex heard it next. He was home early one afternoon, fixing a dripping pipe under the kitchen sink when he caught the faint echo of laughter drifting up from the vent near the floor. At first, he thought the TV was on upstairs. Then he recognized the laugh. His wife's, but sharper, meaner, like someone mocking him in her voice. That night, Alex sat up late in the recliner, beer half drained, staring at the dark rectangle of the vent in the living room. He told himself he wouldn't be spooked like the others. He wouldn't let a draft push him around. Then near 2 a.m, the voice slid out as smooth as if someone were crouched inches away. "It's safe now. Bring them down." It was his own voice. Alex gripped the chair arms, staring at the taped vent. Then overlapping it came Dana's voice. "Come on, sweetheart. We're waiting." He looked to the couch where Dana and Maya slept, curled together under a blanket. They were there, breathing, real. And yet the vent rattled again, carrying the wet sound of a chuckle that didn't belong in any human throat. The next day, Alex insisted they leave. "We'll find another place. I don't care if it's a motel. We're not staying here." They packed that night. Maya clung to her stuffed rabbit. Dana refused to go back into the basement for the last of the boxes. Alex did it himself, flashlight in hand. The basement was colder than usual, damp at the corners where the foundation wept. He hated the furnace, hulking in the far corner, metal skin streaked with rust. He bent to grab the box of Christmas lights. Behind him, the vent coughed once. Then a whisper slithered out. "Alex." He froze. The voice was his father's. His father had been dead 5 years. "Alex, don't go. Stay here. We'll keep you safe." The flashlight beam shook across the cinder block wall. The whisper throbbed again, louder now, and with it came a scraping sound, as though something were crawling along the inside of the ductwork. Closer. He backed away. Box forgotten. Upstairs, Dana waited at the door with Maya in her arms. "Leave it," she said when she saw his face. "Just leave it." They didn't look back when they drove away. The house sat still in the rearview mirror, vents sealed with silver tape, but the memory of the voices followed. In the motel that night, Maya woke once, sitting up in the glow of the bedside lamp. She turned to her parents, pale as paper. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. They listened. From the vent above the motel bed, faint but certain, came the sound of someone laughing. The first morning it happened, Marcy thought one of the kids had spilled something. The steps leading down into the basement glistened under the kitchen light, damp enough to soak her socks. But when she opened the basement door, the air that rushed up was bone dry, carrying nothing but that old, chalky smell of concrete and dust. She crouched down, touched the lowest step, and felt the strange slickness. No puddle, no leak, nothing. Just wet shoe prints leading up and then gone. By the second week, the rhythm set in. Every morning around 6, before she woke the kids for school, the steps were wet again. Always drying by midday, always starting fresh the next dawn. She mentioned it casually to Dan over dinner. He just shrugged, said maybe condensation. But he didn't sound convinced. Their son Cody swore he heard dripping in the night. But whenever Dan went down, flashlight in hand, the basement floor was dusty, littered with the same boxes of holiday decorations and old lawn chairs as always. No water stains, no cracks, nothing. The smell began to change. Marcy noticed it one evening while folding laundry. The faint tang of mildew, damp cloth left too long in a washer. It clung to the air by the doorway. She bought plug-in deodorizers, burned candles, sprayed disinfectant. Still, the odor lingered, and with it came the sound. At first, she thought it was the furnace humming oddly. But then, sitting awake after midnight, she realized it was different. A hollow trickling, like a stream running behind the walls. It would rise and fall, then stop the moment someone flicked on a light. The kids refused to go down after that. Leah, the youngest, cried one morning, saying she saw someone standing at the bottom step. "A man, all wet," she whispered, shivering as Marcy held her. Dan tried to laugh it off, but that night, after they tucked everyone in, he admitted he'd caught sight of it too. Just a shape, a darker shade against the dark, crouched where the basement floor should be. He said it looked like it was waiting, hands pressed against the first step as though ready to climb. They started locking the basement door, but even that didn't matter. The wet footprints appeared on the landing outside, small ones mixed with larger ones. The trail led into the hallway carpet, fading out halfway toward the bedrooms. Marcy's dreams filled with the roar of rushing water, her children's voices muffled beneath it, calling from somewhere deep and far below. When she jolted awake, the trickling would be there, soft and steady, echoing through the walls. One morning, she found Cody's sneakers on the landing, soaked through, though he'd been asleep in his bed all night. His jeans were wet up to the knees, cold and stiff as though they'd been submerged. He swore he hadn't gone down there. He looked pale, teeth chattering, though the house was warm. "He keeps asking me," Cody muttered. "He wants me to come back down. He says he's lonely." That evening, Dan nailed the basement door shut, but around 2 a.m., the sound of rushing water filled the house, louder than ever, like a river bursting its banks. Marcy ran to the hallway and froze. Every step of the staircase glistened, soaking, the water dripping steadily onto the carpet below. And standing on the landing just beneath the dim bulb was a figure, a man with hair plastered flat, clothes clinging tight, his face hidden in shadow. Behind him, up the stairs, smaller shapes clustered, their outlines wavering like reflections on dark water. The dripping stopped. The smell of mildew thickened. Marcy clutched the banister, her breath gone as the figure lifted its head slowly, and she realized the basement had never been dry at all. It was just waiting for the right moment to rise. When the crew tore down the drywall in the basement of the old house on Buckner Street, the first thing they noticed was the frame of another door, narrow and sunken into the foundation like it had been waiting. The homeowner, a tired woman named Carla who had bought the property at auction, stood behind them with her arms crossed, muttering that the blueprints never showed a second entrance. The air that slipped through the crack when the workers pried the hinges loose was cooler than the rest of the basement, stale in a way that seemed untouched for decades. The stairs were raw wood, crooked with age, leading into a chamber lit only by their portable work lamp. It was unfinished concrete, not much bigger than a bedroom, and every wall was layered in chalk scrawls, stick figures with stretched smiles, crude houses, looping suns. The drawings went all the way to the ceiling, overlapping in frantic layers as though some small hand had pressed to fill every inch before the chalk ran out. The silence down there was heavy, swallowing even their footsteps. One of the workers, a broad man named Luis, whispered that it felt like a classroom no one was meant to graduate from. Carla insisted they keep going, pretending to be curious, though her voice shook. She leaned close to one patch of wall where the chalk was thicker, colors pressed into grooves of concrete. Beneath it, faint indentations showed, marks not made by chalk but by fingernails dragged across stone. She backed away quickly, telling herself it was nothing, probably kids hiding out years ago. Luis and another worker exchanged a look but didn't argue. People didn't pay them to interpret things. That night, after the crew left, Carla stayed up late at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. She couldn't shake the way the chamber felt, like the air carried a pressure that wanted her gone. At 2 a.m, she finally padded downstairs with a flashlight. She found herself standing before the open door again, heart knocking in her chest. The beam of light quivered across the chalk drawings. Something about them looked different, sharper, brighter, as if new strokes had been added since daylight. She whispered out loud, just to prove the silence wouldn't answer, but the words seemed to die before reaching the far wall. Her beam paused on one drawing she swore she hadn't noticed before, a crude outline of a woman at a table, head bent, a small rectangle drawn in her hands. It looked eerily like her, sitting exactly as she had been earlier. A soft scraping sound came then, faint but steady, like chalk dragged against stone. It came from the far corner, deep in the shadows where her light refused to reach. She thought about stepping closer, but her knees locked. The sound kept going, slow and deliberate, and she realized the newest figure on the wall had gained a smile that stretched far too wide. Carla backed away one step at a time, never turning her back to the room. When she reached the stairs, she fumbled for the light switch, but the bulb overhead had gone dead. She climbed blindly, stumbling, pulling the basement door shut with shaking hands. She pressed her shoulder against it until her breathing slowed. In the silence above, she thought she heard children giggling faintly, like chalk breaking under pressure, and a small thud against the door as though someone had just finished another drawing on the inside. I didn't move to Keyspan Avenue to chase ghosts. Rent was cheap for a reason. Half the houses on the block were foreclosures, and the old steel mill stink still hung in the mornings if the wind came from the river. The duplex at 11812 had a thrift store feeling. Mismatched doorknobs, stubborn windows that needed a shoulder to close, a faint smell of laundry soap and damp wood. My landlord, Mrs. Kelleher, was a widow with a permanent windbreaker, and a way of speaking that made every sentence sound like a warning without quite being one. "Basement's yours if you want it," she said, handing me the key. "Use the shelves. Ignore what came with the house." The basement was a low rectangle with a cement floor that sweated in summer. On move-in day, I went down to stash the Rubbermaids, holiday junk I didn't have the heart to toss, my old college microwave, a box of VHS tapes from a thrift store binge years ago when I thought I'd collect things from before my time. The shelves were already crowded with stuff that didn't belong to me. There were coffee cans full of screws that looked like they'd rust to the fingers if you touched them, a toppled laundry basket of tangled extension cords, and a cardboard file box labeled in block letters, "Neighborhood Party 1989. Inside the box were magazines, Youngstown Vindicator, parade inserts, a church raffle flyer for something called the Corn Roast, and one black VHS tape in a plastic sleeve. The sticker on the spine had been written with a steady hand, "Neighborhood Party 1989. Under it, in smaller letters, "Keyspan, ha." The misspelling made me smile. People say the names of their streets out loud and only guess at the spelling. I didn't own a VCR anymore, but my upstairs neighbor Don did. He's from here, in the way that means he can tell you which storefront used to be a bakery and who used to date whom before the mill closed. He was 30 years older than me and walked with a careful side-to-side sway, a habit from old back injuries. "Sure, you can borrow it," he said, digging through one of his closets. "You got something to watch?" I showed him the tape. His eyes flicked over it, unreadable. "Party tape," he said, like a diagnosis. "People used to videotape everything." I set the VCR on the floor in my living room, coaxed an HDMI adapter to cooperate with my TV, and fed the tape in. The tracking wobbled, then steadied. The screen resolved into a living room, someone else's 36 years earlier. You could tell it was summer by the sleeveless shirts, the sheen on people's cheeks. A tower fan sat in the corner like a prop. The carpet had a shag to it. A ball of streamers drooped above a folding table with bowls of chips and something pink in a plastic punch bowl. People were dancing to music I couldn't hear. The tape carried no audio, just a faint magnetic hiss. A woman in a big floral dress tossed her hair, mouth open in a laugh I couldn't hear. Someone's elbow flashed in front of the lens and then withdrew. Whoever held the camera kept it steady and close to eye level. I didn't notice the first person who stopped dancing. I noticed when there were 3 of them, then 5. It was like a wave going through the room that had nothing to do with rhythm. One by one they slowed, they turned, faces facing. They looked at the camera, their smiles not falling exactly but draining to something neutral. Their arms lowered. A man with a paper plate tilted his head, the way your dog does when it hears a sound in the walls. The camera didn't zoom or pan. It just held patient. Eventually, everyone in the frame was still and looking directly into the lens. Then the tape bled to static. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and hit stop. Static stopped. The tape's label stared up from the VCR, domesticated and ridiculous. My living room was empty, my street quiet. A car went by and rattled a hubcap. It was after 10. Light pooled at the corner from a street lamp that flickered pink before it steadied white. I ejected the tape and set it atop the VCR as if you could give plastic time to cool down. I told myself it was a home video that got weird for a second and then ended. The weirdness was probably a joke. Maybe they were mocking the camera. Maybe someone shouted, "Freeze!" and I couldn't hear it. The next morning, when I went to the basement to get my tool bag, the tape was back in the cardboard file box. I stood there, bag in hand, and waited for memory to catch up to itself. Maybe I'd carried it down without thinking last night. The way you sometimes find a spoon in the bathroom and realize you're more tired than you think. But the VCR was upstairs, the adapter still jammed into the TV, the cable dangling. I reached into the box and picked the tape up. Its plastic retained a faint cool, the way things feel if they've been sitting on concrete. It smelled faintly of dust and weirdly the perfume of old paper. That evening I watched it again. I told myself I was looking for proof it was a joke. Same opening, dancing, the fan clicking, no sound. But this time when they stilled and stared, the camera moved. Maybe an inch to the left, like the person holding it shifted their weight. The left edge of the frame disclosed a sliver of a staircase. I stared at that edge until my eyes watered. My living room didn't have stairs, but my unit's front door opened onto the duplex's shared staircase. Rail painted brown, trim a tired cream. In the tape, the rail looked the same color as mine. The hall runner in the background was a pattern I'd seen before. Little dark lozenges like seeds. I paused it and took a photo with my phone, then walked out to my own hall and compared them. Close was an understatement. My runner had frayed along the wall in a way that made little arrows of thread. The runner in the photo had the same fray. I felt it in my throat. That small, dry click of fear when the world insists on being smaller than it should be. At work the next day, the sheet metal shop on Henry Road where I was temporarily patching in, I told Mariah about the tape. She's 2 bays down from me. Hands always tortilla floured with aluminum dust, earbuds in, world half her own. Sounds like a cheesy art project, she said. Like in school when you had to make a video about your neighborhood. I said I'd show her after our shift. She narrowed her eyes at me. If this is one of those screamers, I'll throw your VCR out the window. It's not a screamer, I said. It's just weird. We invited Don, too, because I wanted a witness who had lived here in 1989. He declined the first invite, said he had a standing TV night. But when I said 89 and party, his mouth made a shape like he was tasting an old penny. People talked, he said. Back then, after, but no one had the facts right. I'll come by. They showed up at 7. I put out a bowl of off-brand cheese puffs from Carrie's on Belmont, because it felt appropriate. The VCR hummed with that electric warmth of an appliance that never quite turns off. I pressed play. The picture did its wobble and found the living room. Mariah leaned forward, chewing slowly. Okay, she said. Time capsule. Don didn't sit. He stood behind the couch with his hand on the curtain as if he could shut the outside out if needed. We watched the dancing and the slow turn of faces. When they all stared, Mariah swore under her breath. Weird, she said. How'd they get everybody to do it the same way? Don made a sound like clearing his throat, but it was too low for that. The camera drifted its inch to the left. The staircase revealed a little more of itself. 3 risers, a dark nail head catching the light. Don said in a small voice, That's this house. And then louder, That's this house. I felt a childish urge to reassure him. Lots of houses look the same, I said. He shook his head. No. Kelleher's husband put that runner in. Bought it at a going-out-of-business sale over on Market. He told everybody how cheap he got it, he pointed. See that wrinkle? That's where the tack came loose. He used a penny to hold it down for a while. The tape's light caught a small copper face. The camera's attention felt personal. Then the picture did something it hadn't done before. It cut mid-stare, a spasm of static, and when the image returned, the room was darker, the party thinner. The faces that remained were the ones that had been closest to the camera, now even closer, like they'd stepped in. In the middle distance, through the archway, the hallway light glowed the yellow of our building's overheads. That's tonight, Don said, and I hated him for saying it out loud because I'd felt it too. At that exact second, something thumped below us in the basement. Not a house-settling sound. A confident, impatient thump like a single beat of a bass with the rest of the band missing. I stopped the tape. The room reasserted itself. Mariah took out an earbud she hadn't been wearing. Nope, she said, standing. Nope, I'm good. Don held up a hand. Don't go down there, he said to no one in particular. That's not for us. He looked at the VCR like it was an animal that would bite if you tried to move it. Whoever had that camera knew what to look at. "Look," I said, pretending to a calm I did not feel. "It's some old thing someone made. It's unsettling, but it's cut together. People did video art like that." There's probably a second tape where they explain the joke. Even as I said it, I knew I'd be checking that box in the basement for another cassette, as if an explanation could plug the hole opening in the air. After they left, I carried the tape down the stairs like it might slosh if I tilted it. The basement felt colder than upstairs. I could hear the refrigerator through the floor, the hum of a bus on Belmont 2 blocks over, the whisper of the dehumidifier's fan blade ticking against a loose screen. I set the tape back in the box and closed the lid. That small move felt like a truce I had no right to declare. At 2 a.m, a second sound woke me, a faint, regular rhythm under the hum of the neighborhood's sleeping machines. It wasn't music, not exactly. It was the ghost of it, the part you can't unhear after you've stood too near a subwoofer. It came from the basement floor like someone was knocking on the underside of the earth. I lay awake and counted the beats. They didn't line up with my breath. They didn't speed up or slow. The next morning I found the tape on my coffee table. Plastic warm as if someone had been holding it. "I don't want to hear about any activity," Mrs. Kelleher said when I tried to bring it up with her. She was out front clipping dead heads off the marigolds the city planted in a slumped line under the maple. "This house is old. Sounds travel. That's all. Please don't make this the kind of thing where people start coming by." "What people?" I asked. She didn't answer, just snapped a brittle stem and let it fall. That afternoon I went to the library on 5th. The local history room is a basement of its own. No windows, a smell of paste. The librarian, a patient man with chewed cuticles, guessed my question before I asked. "Party on Keyspan?" he said. "I've had folks ask. Not for years." He rolled a card of bound Vindicator volumes toward me. "You won't find a lot. There was a blackout that night. Big chunk of the north side. People remember that more than anything." The paper recorded the outage. It recorded 2 days later a notice for a missing cat with a photo that looked like a smudged pudding, an ad for a pawn shop offering top dollar for camcorders, in a neighborhood news column, a name that pricked at me, a mention that the Kellehers hosted a block barbecue for the first time that year. Great turnout reported, pies devoured, no photos. A week after that, a smaller item, a reminder that the community watch would begin weekly patrols again. The tone was gentle but chastising. Someone had entered a residence while the owners were away and rearranged furniture, as a prank. Locks should be checked. Lights set on timers. I photocopied the items and brought them home. The beat in the basement was, if anything, softer during the day. The house rested. Across the street, a kid practiced shooting free throws at a hoop mounted to a garage, each thud like a hand on a door. I poured the last of my coffee into a mug that had a chip on its lip and stared at my turned-off TV until I felt dumb. I didn't play the tape that night. I tried to ignore it and felt how contagious attention is. Every silence starts to sound like the thing you're trying not to hear. At 9, someone knocked. It was Don, jacket zipped up to his throat. "I have something," he said and held out a Polaroid. It was faded to the color of old tea, but the faces were clear enough. A living room, a crowd, people mid-step, mid-laugh, the instant before you know you're being watched. "My sister took it at a party," he said. "Summer '89, we were there for a bit. I left early, I don't remember why. Everyone was manically cheerful that year, just despite how bad things were. You know how people get." He tapped the bottom of the photo. In the near corner, a woman in a floral dress had her head turned, listening for something behind the camera. "That's your living room," he said, "or the mirror image of it. But that's our staircase in the back. That wrinkle in the runner, that penny. Do you remember a camera?" I asked. He thought for a long time. "No," he said. "But I remember people complaining afterward about being on camera without asking. And I remember, it's dumb, coming home later that week and finding my TV moved 2 inches on its stand. I wouldn't have noticed if not for the dust." He was about to leave when he paused. "When we were kids," he said, "my mom used to say if you don't want something in your house, you have to not make a place for it." She meant shoes by the door and candy on the table, but I think about it sometimes. A place can be made of attention. What you look at, what you keep, what you replay. Maybe don't rerun it. Just a thought. I didn't rerun it. For 3 days I didn't. I went to work, cut and bent and riveted metal. I ate cereal standing up. I fell asleep to the sound in the basement the way people in cities fall asleep to traffic. On the fourth day, I found the tape lying on the mat inside my front door, as if someone had slid it through. There were thin, damp footprints on the mat that dried while I watched them. At sunset one evening a week later, a group of neighbors set up folding tables on the sidewalk. Someone had made posters, Block Social, Friday 7 p.m., taped to the poles. The smell of charcoal drifted into my windows. I took a plate down, contributed my awkward offering of grocery store potato salad in its lidless tub, accepted a beer from a man with a cracked tooth. I stood next to Mariah and listened to a woman explain her theory of why the raccoons had hands like people. The heat had the gummy feeling of a gym. Kids ran in arcs, their voices darting clear then muffled. The sun went down behind the houses, and the light did that Ohio trick of being the same lemon yellow for too long, and then, suddenly, gone. Someone said, "Does anybody have a speaker?" Someone else said, "I've got a radio," and produced a boxy thing from a garage. It was a relic that would have matched the tape. The music was a little too loud for talking and a little too soft for dancing. People tried anyway. The beat was old, the kind that counts off on its own. I felt it in my throat again, that click, and then it happened as simply as a shared yawn. People near me slowed, turned. Their faces shifted into that neutral waiting. The man with the cracked tooth lowered his paper plate, angle precise. Mariah's mouth closed around a word that never made it out. One by one, as if following a cue that arrived by mail and was opened without thinking, everyone looked toward the entrance to the building. Not just the building, my door. I looked up at the window of my living room. A red LED winked there, reflected in the glass. The VCR I had not turned on had decided that now was record. When I tried to move, my body honored the party before me and chose stillness. My eyes did the moving for me, a small pan. The hallway light beyond my door was on. It threw that soft yellow onto the runner. It caught the copper glint of a penny that had worked loose and rolled to a stop against the baseboard like the dot at the end of a sentence. Something moved at the far end of the hall, just out of frame. Not a shadow, not a person, the absence of both. The air pushed toward us as if the house took a breath. The music from the radio cut to a low, recorded hum, like tape left near a magnet too long. From the basement came the soft, insistent beat I'd tried so hard not to measure my life to. It matched the radio now. It matched my heart, or else my heart had learned it. I felt the shape of a camera on me without seeing it. The way you know exactly where someone is in a dark room when they think you're asleep. Inside, my TV screen glowed a gray between channels. The image shivered and then held. I saw the crowd outside my building framed on my own screen. Everyone turned toward the door, everyone not blinking. But it wasn't a live view through the window. It was grainy, like a memory. In the bottom corner, a little block of digital text flickered and failed to form. Then, as if it gave up trying to date itself, it went blank. The red LED brightened. The counter on the VCR ticked forward. 0001. I don't remember who moved first. I know that my next memory is of being inside, the door shut behind me. I know that the hall smelled like cut grass and hot plastic. I know that somewhere behind the walls, something knocked in time with a song only the house knew. I walked to the living room as if the floor wanted me there. On the screen, my living room appeared. Same couch, same crooked thrift store print of a lighthouse I'd hung to make the wall less empty, but the room on the screen was darker, the edges reaching in. The camera didn't pan. It breathed. The stairs at the edge of the frame showed 3 risers and the nail head as round and black as an eye. And then, in the screen's glass, like seeing yourself in a window on a bus at night, I saw me. Not a reflection exactly. The version of me you get when you film someone and they are not ready for it, when all their habits are at rest. I watched my screen-warm face choose to turn. It turned to face the camera, and the person that I am when I don't think to be anything else froze, polite as a guest who has been asked to stay for a photograph. Outside, the radio clicked off. The block exhaled and then did not inhale. I stood there for a long time, measured not by a clock but by that red LED on the VCR, counting seconds into a place beyond numbers. On the tape, somewhere past the edge of the frame, feet whispered on a staircase as if they were coming up for air. The breath of the house deepened. It didn't want a scream or a bargain. It wanted what it had always wanted, Attention enough to be a room again, and then another room, and then a night with people in it. When the screen finally went to static, it held there, not blank exactly, but thick and waiting, like snow that doesn't touch the ground yet. In the noise, a pattern asserted itself the way faces do in clouds. It looked like wallpaper. It looked like a wrinkle. It looked like a penny rolling into the dark and settling on its edge, waiting for a thumb to decide whether it goes to heads or tails. I used to think the creepiest thing in our split level was the basement sink, the old metal kind with the rust lip and a drain that moaned. Then Eli found the toy soldier at a neighbor's moving sale and brought it home like a stray cat, arms out, thrilled, not thinking about fleas. The figure was tin about as tall as my index finger. Its paint had thinned to a suggestion, pale face, dark cap, square boots. Eli named him Captain March. He saluted the toy and did that poo-poo-poo sound with his tongue. I was just glad it didn't flash or chirp. That first night, Eli told us the captain walks in the dark. He practices in the laundry room, he said, leaning on the couch while Mara rinsed rice in the squeal of the sink. Left, right, left to get ready. It's a toy, bud, I said. He's not moving unless you move him. I didn't, Eli said. He's not for me. He's for the house, and then he padded off, making soft marching sounds that matched his steps. The second morning, the soldier was at the top of the basement stairs, balanced on the edge of the third step from the top, facing the hallway like he'd just come up. The boots had scraped a thin arc on the white paint. I called to Mara. She came with a towel turban and a folder clip between her lips, took it out and frowned. Did Eli put that there? He said the basement, or I said. I picked up the toy. It felt warm, which made no sense. I set it back on the dryer. We should keep the door latched. We did. There was a baby gate left over from when Eli was a toddler, and the basement door had a hook and eye latch. That night, while the dehumidifier hummed, I asked about the sale. It had been at the Klein's place 2 doors down. Basement stuff was her brother's, Mara said. He had a workshop. Died last fall. Around 2 a.m., I woke thirsty. The house felt off, like I was waiting for the fridge to click back on. Then I heard a sound like a pencil tapping wood. Not fast. Measured. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was the dehumidifier feet knocking concrete, or a loose blade in the vent. When I finally slept, I dreamed stairs that didn't end. Each step the same 9 inches up, 32 across. In the morning, the soldier was centered on the kitchen table between our cereal bowls like a place setting. Eli clapped. He made it, he said. He eats first. No, Mara said. He stays in the laundry room. She carried the toy down, shut the door, clicked the hook. When she came back, she said, I hate that thing. It's like a nail in my mouth. We tried to banish him. I put the toy in a shoebox with winter hats and hauled it to the top garage shelf. Around 5:30, when I went for coffee, the box was on the kitchen floor, lid off. The soldier standing at the corner like he was waiting for orders. The door was still latched. The gate was still up. We swept the steps, sprinkled a little flour to see if anything passed. It felt ridiculous, like trapping a mouse you already knew. In the morning, there were tiny, precise scuffs through the flour. Boot-shaped, maybe. They curved as they climbed, each step taken to the same beat. I took the soldier back to Mrs. Klein. She opened her door with red knuckles and a cardigan over a nightgown, even though it was afternoon. I can't have that here, she said when I held out the toy. My brother's boy had one like it. He set it on the steps to scare his sister. Said it would catch her if she fell. When my brother went down one night, She stopped and put a hand to her mouth. Don't bring it here. Throw it in the creek, she said when I hesitated. Then, because people default to kindness even when they're afraid, she asked after Eli's school. I left the toy on the muddy bank behind the soccer fields where the wrappers and leaves drift toward the culvert. He looked ridiculous there, too heavy to float, too small to sink. A dog barked. A whistle blew. I walked away feeling stupid and relieved. At 2 a.m, tap. At 2:02, tap. At 6, the soldier on the third step again, one boot edge over nothing. I took a picture, not to convince anyone, but to convince myself I hadn't dreamed the whole house. Eli started setting out a saucer of water for the toy, the way kids do for the tooth mouse or a stray. He's tired, he said. He practices all night. He wants us to practice too. We don't practice the stairs, I said. No standing on the edge. He repeated it back, smiling like the rule applied to someone else. The house changed shape around the sound. Loading the dishwasher, I found myself thinking in studs and risers, measuring the run to the landing. At work, when a kid fidgeted and I said, "Feet flat, eyes front," I heard my own voice return from below in the clack of boots. I started dreaming of lines that don't bend even when the world does. Mara bought a nightlight shaped like a candle and stuck it in the hall. "For Eli," she said. We both watched it, checking whether it flickered when the taps came. When Eli had a fever and slept in our bed, the house was as quiet as move-in day. He cooled, went back to his room, and the taps resumed, patient as a metronome. One icy night, the power flickered and we ate sandwiches by flashlight. The beam slid over the stairwell and there was the soldier on the same step as always. But now he'd edged to the other side, as if he'd been walking a line across it back and forth, wearing a path only shadow could show. I tried breaking him. I told no one this. I took him to the garage and bent his knee with a hammer, not hard, just enough to change him. The metal squealed. I felt awful while I did it and worse when I stopped. I put him on the dryer. In the morning, the knee looked straight. Maybe it had never bent. There was a new scratch on his boot, a thin, silver smile. That weekend, we cleaned the basement. Behind the sink, we found a coffee can with a little roll of paper rubber banded inside. The paper cracked when we uncurled it. There were rows like a drill chart. Doors, windows, switches, stairs, counted, checked, signed. The last line read, "Practice," underlined twice. "Was this here when we moved in?" Mara asked. I don't remember. She held the paper like it might tell her which way to look. "My brother had chores like this," she said. "Count steps. Check locks." We set the chart on the dryer under the toy. That night I dreamed a line of children in heavy boots. My students, but in clothes from some other time. They marched down our hall and into the dark stairwell, each one counting under their breath. I tried to step aside, but there's no space when everyone keeps their shoulders square and eyes on the head in front. We planned to sleep at Mara's sister's. I locked the basement door, felt foolish, unlocked it, then relocked it. At the car, I remembered a charger and went back in. The house had that echo you only hear after you've said goodbye for the night. No tap, the silence rang. I turned the latch and heard the smallest click from below, like someone in the dark answered with their own latch. We didn't go. Eli fell asleep on the couch. At 1:30, tap. At 1:32, tap. I let them come. The taps reached the door and paused. The hook lifted with a shrug I felt more than heard, a movement of wood as if old instructions the house remembered outranked new ones I'd made. I woke Mara by placing the soldier in her palm. He was cold as a coin. We sat in the blue nightlight and listened to the ducks tick like they knew which way to turn. Eli came out, hair smashed to one side. He saw the toy and smiled the way he had the first day. "He wants us to practice," he said. "We're supposed to be at the top when the horn blows." "What horn?" I asked. "The one under the floor," he said, and stood with his toes at the edge of the top step the way the toy used to, eyes on the dark. "Left, right, left," he whispered, and for a moment the house felt crowded, like men with no place left to be had come home along the short path through pipes and beams. We don't leave the door unlatched now. The toy sits on the dryer with the chart under him. Some mornings he's on the step, some on the table, some on the floor by Eli's door as if he lost count and had to begin again. The scuffs multiply. The scratch on his boot has deepened to a groove. I tell myself I'm not superstitious, that I'm just tired. Then the taps come and all my good sense goes quiet, waiting for orders. Before dawn last Tuesday, I opened the basement door and found no soldier on the stair. Relief lifted me like standing after a long meeting. Then I saw the faint trail of flour sliding across the rug toward Eli's room. The door was ajar. In the oval of window light on the carpet, there were tiny marks in a circle, the kind boots make when someone is standing at attention and turning slowly to face each wall. Eli was asleep, one arm over his eyes. I didn't say his name. The ring felt thin enough to break with sound. I backed away and set the door until the latch took with a click I felt in my teeth. It isn't exactly tapping anymore. It's like the space under the floor is counting. And sometimes we hear the numbers when the furnace shifts or the water in the pipes goes still. I've measured the stairs with a ruler. I've pictured selling, then pictured the new owners laughing until the first morning they stop. I hold the toy sometimes, feel that groove, and think of Eli at the edge of the step and of men who kept their eyes front, because the world went crooked around them. This morning, the soldier isn't anywhere you can see. You'd think that meant the story is over, but the kitchen chairs are an inch off from last night, squared to an angle I don't remember setting. Eli's door is open a thumb's width. The nightlight in the hall has burned out, and in the thin dust on the paint of the top stair there is a mark, like a boot edge holding steady over nothing, waiting for the rest of the line to catch up.